I like the idea that we got some of the matchups that we saw at the end of the year, right? Like the Big Ten SEC thing that we had with Ohio State a couple times. Like I think people have always dreamed about those types of matchups. Honestly, the in-state matchup with Indiana and Notre Dame, I thought that was a super fun thing for us to see. And so this idea that like, we got to the Final Four and, based off of the paths of like, some of the cream's got to rise to the top, got 4 blue bloods in there, right?
We
And like
did.
I think it was exciting to see some of that. But even the round before that, we saw one of the teams who kind of got in on the back end, who really challenged Texas, Arizona State, the great season that they had. So I do think the matchups and kind of some of the storylines that were developed there were certainly something that you could grab onto by the end of the year.
Yeah, I think so too. And that's one of the things that, again, anticipated, you're actually going to play this stuff out on the field instead of the hypotheticals and instead of these ideas of how, different leagues stack up or, the second best team in different leagues stack up against each other. You actually get to play it out. And I think that part was awesome. You had 11 CFP games instead of 3. So when you talk about, opt-outs, didn't really see any high profile opt-outs, right? Everybody played. You saw like some second string guys go into the portal for some of the teams, and that was about it. Everybody else played. People played through injuries because these games meant a lot. So that certainly achieved that goal. I also think that I expected a little bit more of a drop off or the idea of like these quote meaningless bowl games to be a little bit more quote meaningless. But there were some awesome bowl games, and like I'm partial to the Pop-Tarts and the mayo and like the ones that have they're up to their antics. But there were so many close games, crazy comebacks. Like the rest of bowl season, I thought that was a positive as well. Somehow, I think maybe that we were trying to honor both, like the path and the path to the playoff, but also the rest of it. And maybe some were contractual that like your NIL deals required you to play in the playoff game or a postseason game. But I thought that the rest of the bowl season also ended up being really strong. Like the regular season was great. You had a bunch of crazy games in the bowls, and then you had a really good college football playoff too.
Yeah, I mean, I think that does speak to just what college football was this year and how balanced it felt at times where matchups on any given weekend could feel really intriguing. But I think there's also this flip side of it, which is a benefit to the playoff, is we got wrapped up in so many more storylines with so many more teams that we kind of wanted to see how they would finish. Like I'm sitting there as somebody who was like down on Lincoln Riley, USC is a dumpster fire, and we watched them open up with an SEC team and win, and then have a ridiculous comeback against Texas A&M and win that game. And like, I'm not sure that I would typically want to watch a 6-6 USC team, but I'm also a sicko, so I typically turn on the bowl games. But I was in there to watch them just to see what the end of the season was going to look like and what tone that would set for the offseason. So I do think this idea of maybe more teams that we're looking at and, where they're at certain points of the year in terms of their ability to compete for the actual playoff led us to, well, I might as well watch them finish their season because I followed them for so much.
Yeah. And you were just intrigued, right? Because we weren't only talking about like the same 4 to 6 teams every year, which I think in the 4-team era, there were only about 6 teams that were really in the mix to compete or get a spot in the first place. There are a couple of years where someone would kind of come out of nowhere like a TCU, but for the most part, you could pencil in teams. You knew which programs were going to be the ones feeding teams into the playoff or had the schedule to do it. So I think that was a huge positive.